Hello and welcome to today's pattern. I'm doing my best to keep my hands as still as possible because you're about to find out why I've got a tungsten bead threaded onto my tying thread before I catch on.
Have you been thinking about tying flies but don't know where to start? We've got a free series of video tutorials that might interest you. A lot of YouTube videos jump straight in with the tying and there's really no time for a beginner to get a handle on what's going on. So we've created a series of individual step-by-step videos that cover the basics of fly tying. In each video you'll learn a different skill at your own pace. So for instance, we'll teach you how to tie on a thread on the hook. We'll teach you how to tie in materials on the hook. We'll teach you how to dub materials onto the thread. And we'll cover several ways of whip finishing to finish the fly at the end of the tying. Once you've got a handle on these basics, you'll be able to follow along with YouTube fly tying videos like the one you're about to see. If this sounds like something that might interest you, click the link in the description and you can start your free fly tying tutorials today.
Okay, so today's fly is going to be very simple, but there's a slight little quirk, a little dodge if you like. It saves you. There's two options really with tying this fly. You can tie the front half of it of the fly, finish that, tie it off, thread a bead on, and then finish it. Or if you want to, you can do it all in one movement, but avoid having a lashing loop or a turn of tying thread over the outside of the bead. This particular pattern, it's so simple it doesn't even have a shell back. But as well as getting that effect of having the hot spot in the middle of the fly, which is part of its function, it's also playing about with the distribution of where the centre of balance is, where the weight is sitting on that fly. That's something we go into a lot more detail in the Fly Fishing Bible of Nymphing in the book, and talking about understanding how and why you might want to mess about with the position of your weight. But for the time being, if you just treat that bead as if it were the end of the nozzle of your bobbin holder, then that just kind of sits out of the way and is relatively unobtrusive. And it's just a case of catching on as you normally would do. It does sort of jump about a little bit, but it doesn't actually get in the way of a fly that's as simple as this particular pattern. Another thing to note about this one is I'm tying today with a white ultimate tying silk, and that's because the dubbing I'm going to use is pretty translucent, and understanding what colours and what shades actually show through when the fly's wet can be very different from how it looks in the vise. So if I use a very strong, thick black thread with a pale dubbing, the effect you get can be really good because you get a sort of almost like a ribbed effect where the darker tying thread actually shows through the body. In this instance, I want the dubbing to be fairly true to the colour as it starts out on the hook, and for that reason I'm using this almost blank canvas approach of having the neutral white coloured GSP. So again, it's quite interesting because you do have a degree of flexibility with this stuff because it takes pen pretty well. So if you want to colour sections of it, maybe at the head end or for any other reason, you can stripe it with a pen at any point. But you've got that kind of, as I say, a blank canvas to start with. So this one I'm going to dress almost in reverse. We're going to start at the head, finish at the tail end. It's just a little bit of different sort of techniques on show. And again, just showing you how to get that bead onto the hook without lashing over it with your tying thread while you're at it. So I'm coming in with some squirrel grey NBC nymph bug caddis dubbing. It's got a little bit of sparkle in there as well. So as well as the hot spot of the pink bead, you've got some additional little bits of anti-camouflage going on there. What I like to do with this stuff, it's got a great, along with other high quality dubbing, you get a mix of spiky and softer sort of underfur. And if as you take it out of the packet, you start to twist it into a dubbing rope, it means that you can actually catch that material in with a bit of a pinch and loop. And that has an interesting effect. If I'm tying a gammarous type pattern, I might leave some of those fibres sticking forwards. or alternative circumstances I might trim those off, but for today I'm going to leave those in place. What you can then do, because I've got this end now tethered of that dubbing sort of wad of material, when I start to spin that up, I've got really fine control over what's going on with the density, the width, and how tightly that's wrapped around. So I can back off a turn or two and make that looser, more relaxed, or I can keep going and I can really make it almost like a dubbing brush that you'd create on a spindle by sort of furling it up. So trapping that tail end, it's a bit like that boa constrictor thing. They can only really squeeze you when they've got the tail anchored, and then they can kind of bind those coils down around your body. And it's the same with this dubbing. If you trap its tail end, every additional turn that you put on there will tighten it even further. And you can get into other stuff as well, and depending on which spiral you twist your dubbing in, if that backs off at one turn every time you put a turn of thread on, then that will loosen it. Or you can deliberately put it so that every turn of dubbing that you make actually tightens your rope again. So there's lots of little bits of subtlety that you can play with respect to controlling that dubbing material. And actually, fly tying is all about the ability to control that material as you're applying it to either the thread or the hook. There isn't much else to it. It is all about material control. So for this one here, I can just let that hang. That allows me again to have complete control over that dubbing rope, and I can do really controlled touching turns. And the spiral that I've twisted it on means that it'll just relax a little bit with each turn that I give it. So I'm getting a slight taper just because that dubbing rope is relaxing as I'm coming through. I'm going to come down to about there. Let that spin out a bit, and then fret off the stuff that I don't need. And because I've lived in Yorkshire now longer than I lived growing up in Lancashire, I'm going to save that material for the next part of my fly as well. I'll be getting shot on my way home now. Right, so that's got that material off there. Shorten the working length of thread up a little bit. So this is just the dodge really. At this point I need to pop the fly out of the vise and then thread that bead over the point of the hook. Apologies that I'm having to do that in closed fingers, but I think you get the idea of what's going on. That now means, as I pop that back in the vise, hopefully having not moved it too far, it now means that the thread is sticking out the backside end of that bead. And I can just fret these fibres out of the way a little bit, these little feelers at the front. Consolidate that in place with a couple of turns of thread just to anchor that in position on the shank. And again, if you do get to reading the book, the shaggy sort of profile and the simple look about this particular pattern. It's one of those unobtrusive flies that you see it in somebody's box and you almost sort of look past it because it looks too scruffy to work, but it's not a million miles away from the profile of Stanislav Chos's carpet nymphs, which if you've read the story in the book, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. What you can do when you catch those fibres in there, if you don't want to trim them off, is actually double them back. And so they will be spun and trapped into that dubbing material as well. You can slide this up and down a little bit still just to get the right density of material. What I've tried to do here is to sort of taper it a bit more towards the back end, and I'll keep managing that as I put the turns of the body on. Again, I'm making a bit of a dam of this material here to keep that bead sat in the correct place. And then when I'm happy with that, I can start coming down the rest of the body of the fly a little bit. And anyone who's ever had a fly pattern that's got more effective, the more fish they've caught on it will recognise the value of that scruffy nymph sort of profile. Like a bit of a curve on these ones, so come a little bit way down the body of the fly, and then it's a case of just lifting that whip finish tool over the back of the fly, and finishing off there. I mean, if you think about it, we have heads at the front of the fly, and fish don't really care whether there's a couple of turns of thread here or at the front end. It matters not to them. Snip that off. It's up to you whether you dab a bit of head cement or glue on there to finish that off, but with these, particularly this Fish On Ultimate Tying Silk, it's very, very robust. Just have no concerns at all really with finishing off with that there. But if you wanted to, you could double down on that and consolidate that with a little bit more of sort of a cement material to lock it in. But there we go, a hot spot bug with that kind of a midships positioning of the bead, which it'll change the way that sinks through the water. Very simple fly, but again, very, very effective, particularly in winter.